All right, I am really excited about this presentation today. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen. We have with us today Dr. Michael Seaman, who is an assistant professor in the Arts Management program at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. An amazing creative economy researcher and speaker and just expert. I'll say it, expert on this topic. We also have with us Lisa Gagaudis, who runs the Create Denver program at Denver Arts and Venues, and has been doing extraordinary work to support artists, performers, venues, cultural organizations through this time. And lastly, our moderator for this conversation is the culture editor at Westword, Kyle Harris. So with that, I'm gonna turn myself off and turn it over to our great speakers to talk about this data, to talk about where we're at right now and what we can do going forward. Take it away.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for coming out today. And it's great to see everybody. Thanks to CBCA, NIVA, Levitt, and the Colorado Music Collective for putting this together. Before we dive into the numbers, or as we dive into the numbers, I think it's a really good idea to think a little bit about what the music scene looked like and the music industry looked like in Colorado before COVID and then after COVID. And, you know, Michael, Lisa, whoever wants to take that for starters, let's start there.
I'm getting the point from Lisa. So yes, I prepared a few slides just to give an idea of how things were healthy before and then what happened. And then we can talk about ways forward and such. So permit me to share my screen. Okay, I'm not sure what. Okay, how's that? All good? All right. So Colorado's music ecosystem was very healthy before the COVID crisis came into play. You're looking at about 16,000 people employed. Largely, most of the employment was in live events, you know, the hosting and staging of shows and festivals, as well as people performing at them and making sure they happen. So agents, managers, and musicians. The revenues for this were substantial. You had about $1.4 billion of sales of goods and services. So everything from tickets to merchandise, guarantees for artists, things such as that. But it really played out all over. So you had radio, instrument manufacturing, recording studios, things like that. But again, you're looking at the main thrust of this were the live events, which was almost $500 million, and another about $500 million for the people that were making sure these live events happened or were performing in them. Now let's look at the growth. From 2010 to about 2018, the industry itself, the ecosystem, it grew 24%. And that is a strong growth for any industry. And again, live events really was taking off. When you get right down to it, Colorado has positioned itself to be one of the live events capitals of the United States in terms of music. People come from all over the world just for one venue, which is Red Rocks. But for all the festivals we have, we draw people from all over the country and all over the world, and we're very good at it. So as you can see, it was a 39% growth in the people that are putting on these live events, that are doing the lighting, the sound, the staging, promoting of them. Now, to kind of give a better idea of how that growth compares, if you look just at Denver's music ecosystem, which is about half of the entire state's ecosystem, it's really concentrated there. Between 2000, if you look at 2010 to 2016 for Denver, again, you're looking at about 24.2% growth. About 8,569 people within this ecosystem. But comparatively, it's really only just behind craft beverage production, which is huge. You know, that's 9,400 people. So the music ecosystem is solid, very strong in Denver. But look at the growth. The employment growth between this time is, again, 24.2%, which is only behind, again, craft brewing, which took off in this time period, and even IT and software. It outstripped in growth aviation, energy, healthcare, wellness, financial services. That's incredibly strong for an arts and cultural segment. Basically pointing to the fact that the music ecosystem, the music scene, the music industry within Denver and Colorado was very strong leading up to the pandemic. Unfortunately, we encountered the pandemic. So basically what happened in March, I was contacted by a task force in Governor Polis's office to estimate how bad is this going to be. Now, I've had several decades within the music industry at different levels, and I knew immediately this was not going to go well. I've immediately started to think, well, how can we model this? Again, it was my first global pandemic, so I had to look at basically what was on the ground, what was being published. The closest thing I could come in terms of economic models and such that have dealt with a situation, an external shock this big, was maybe something like Hurricane Katrina, except for I had to look at Hurricane Katrina happening in the entire country at the same time for several months. So the first thing I did was I conducted informal interviews with people in the industry, looked at perspectives published via media outlets, private firms, government agencies. I took into consideration the effects of local and statewide stay-at-home and safer-at-home orders and the closing of non-essential businesses. I had to consider, at first, we really didn't know when was live music coming back. When I first started this, it was basically a 24/7 project for, in this case, for at least 2 months. I started to, first you think, well, maybe live events, some of the promoters were thinking they would come back in the fall. Well, this quickly became an unknown. Now, this model is built on that the earliest would be about 2021. There would be access to federal stimulus funds for firms, establishments, and the self-employed. Some of this was easy, some of it did not come to fruition. I had to take into consideration that there was a 24% contraction of the US economy overall predicted, with an average of a 14% unemployment in the Q2 of the economic, of the fiscal year. So these were enormous numbers, something I usually wouldn't have to deal with in terms of economic forecasting. And with the music industry and the broader ecosystem, I had to think of who was losing their jobs. And this would include people that were laid off, furloughed, some temporary, some permanently, plus those who lost tours or multiple DJ gigs, jazz residencies, soundtrack work. It was a fine granular estimation based on, again, all of these inputs to try to capture something that in a normal time is very difficult to quantify because there's so many variables and so much that's not captured by government data sources, which I was using. So with that, I came up with these estimations. Now, this was just for April 1st to July 31st, and this was originally for Governor Polis's task force to figure out how bad is Colorado's economy going to be affected by the COVID-19 crisis. So again, normally Colorado's music industry, about 16,000 jobs, 1.4 billion in annual sales revenue. Between these 4 months, I estimated the losses at about 8,327 jobs and 345 million in sales revenue. So that's 51% of all jobs within the Colorado music industry were lost. Now, granted, remember, this is some temporary, some permanent. Some of these jobs will rebound, but as we're seeing, that is not a definite sure thing. This represents about 25% of all annual sales revenue gone. And if you are at all interested in music, live music, this is not a stretch of the imagination in any way, shape, or form because there is no live music right now. Looking at Denver's music industry, again, normally about half of Colorado, so it's about 8,500 jobs, 842 million in sales revenue. Estimated losses, 4,500 jobs and about 213 million in sales revenue. And that's 53% of all jobs. And again, 25% of all sales revenue. So unfortunately, not the greatest news, but it's something we are now challenged to deal with. And I'm glad we're all here to talk about this, because I know Lisa has a lot of ways forward, but there's still a lot of challenges in front of us.
There we go. Michael, I'm curious what you know about how those numbers may have changed over the past few months, if there's any work being done to kind of look at what's happening now, particularly with new restrictions in place.
That's a great question. I'm getting this literally almost daily at this point. I haven't gone back and specifically looked at music. Sadly, there's also not much of a reason to, because I can just tell you offhand, it's these numbers, but much worse. Music was, the performing arts in general, affected by the COVID crisis. I mean, it was total carnage. You basically have an abrupt stop to an entire industry. Unfortunately, if you're looking at film or design or fashion, some things have rebounded. In the performing arts, it's only gotten worse. And now, as of yesterday, the future doesn't look much better. So it's these numbers stretched out further. I think, this was a 4-month estimation. We're 7 months out now. You could make a fairly good argument that it's these numbers, at least the revenues, probably double what we have. The jobs, that would take a little bit more insight in looking at exactly how things are playing out, but there's not a whole lot of rebound in employment for music.
Well, Lisa, you've been working obviously with the music scene through NIVA and also arts and venues before. You were also to some extent a casualty of, a temporary casualty through the furloughs of this disaster. I'm curious from your perspective, what has the music community's response been to this devastating job loss and obliterated industry?
Well, I love it when Michael uses tonal carnage and you use the words obliterated. We're resilient, to your point, Kyle, I'm on furlough right now with Denver Arts and Venues, and this is what happens when Red Rocks is closed, and that's where we, raise our money as a city agency, and we're all doing our part. And I feel that, that's what we do. That is what we're doing. And with the music community, whether it's the gig workers, the gig economy, or the bars that can't open with music, or the restaurants that have been able to do things like Dazzle, we're seeing everything all over the board. People are playing with a new normal. I know we keep hearing that term, but we're actually really rebuilding a future for music. And I think that's the courageous part about this, whether looking at the national level with NIVA, which is the National Independent Venues Association. These venues across the nation got together in March, and now we have over 2,800 members of venues that would never have normally talked to each other ever in this kind of economy. We're not nonprofits. I say we. They are not nonprofits. They're not doing block booking and touring with performing arts. So having everyone come together at that level is impressive. And the fact that they brought forward the Save Our Stages Act, and that it's at Congress and it's a nonpartisan, piece of change for music industry at a national level, it's incredible. Like, we're rewriting history right now at that height, but down here at the city level and state level for Colorado and Denver, I mean, not a lot of people want to tour right now. We all miss music. We're all kind of sick of seeing something on a screen, but there's some really incredible stuff that people are putting out. And whether it's around fundraising or to just record an album right now, like, please go record music. Now's a great time. Go write music. Our community has always been resilient in that manner, and I have no concern about what amazing things will come out of that. How do we help support that as a city? Well, we do what we do best and try to get out of our own way and support our community best way we can. I'm going to think about federal dollars right now. You know, where arts and venues can't come to the table with much money, like what do we do? So I love looking for money for my community. And right now it's federal dollars and it's Band-Aids. It's Band-Aids. And we did get CARES Act funding. We got about $1 million, we got $1 million, hopefully more. And 700,000 of that is going to venues, and 300,000 is going to individuals in our community. And it's never enough. It's never enough. But with the venues, we're hoping to give up to $25,000 per venue. And again, that is just to make sure we can get through this time. And we don't know what to expect next. And when Governor Polis and, you know, Michael Hancock are explaining yesterday that we're going to go down to 25% capacity. I mean, back in March, April, May, June, talking to any venue and even a place like Dazzle Jazz who can open as a restaurant, they're just like 25% capacity there is no return on investment there. So it's been, I'm all over the board, but this is sort of the vibe. And it's like, what do we need to do? Some people may need to just close for a while and take a deep breath, but hopefully we can do some patchwork with funding and get cities better positioned for things like Save Our Stages Act. If that comes through, that's $15 billion across the nation, knock on wood. Maybe January, February, March, that could come into play. And I want to help our cities across Colorado and across the nation figure out how to position themselves in a good way to advocate for those dollars and have infrastructure to take them in and get them out the door. That's the hard part. Yeah.
And can you walk us through just kind of in a couple bullet points what the Restart Act and Save Our Stages Act would do? You touched on that, but it would be good to just get a little more clarity.
Wouldn't that be nice if I could clarify these acts for you? Yeah, I can talk about the Save Our Stages Act. I mean, that is, it was a $10 billion ask and it got bumped up to 15 billion because we wanted to be more inclusive to other performing arts venues and nonprofits. I mean, it's a funny thing to be asking for federal money again for for-profit music venues. Like, this is unheard of. It's amazing. Our story is being told, so that's what's really important, and everybody loves music, and it's incredible to remind all of us that music's never been taken care of at a federal level. So just the advocacy of that act alone has a ripple effect across the nation on, oh, we should show up for this. So on the one hand, there's that, and then on the technical side, it's more about how that money would be distributed. It's stuck in Congress, like a bunch of other stuff right now. And we need to keep knocking on doors and call your legislators and write letters to get this passed. But, you know, that would just be administered across the nation. And we're trying to figure out how do we get it out? What states get what, who administers it, and how quickly can we do it? Because anything at a government level is just molasses. It's so slow. And we can't have that right now. People are literally trying to just survive. So
as we look at these numbers, one of the messages I keep hearing, particularly from Westward readers, is, you know, we've got to open up. We've got to open up now, and this sort of urgency around this and this sort of paranoia around masks. And what I keep hearing from venues and venue owners is, please, we don't want to open up. We want federal support. That is a consistent message I'm hearing. Is that something that you all are noticing as well? And if so, can you kind of speak to why that might be?
Yeah, I'll start. Michael, I'm sure you have some insight on that from a personal or professional perspective, but I mean, you know, I have no problem saying you can't argue with science right now and wear masks and pull it together. You know, the cool thing about NIVA, the great thing about the NIVA members, it's a spectrum, you know, and every venue is different. So we can't really speak to everybody's situation. I think if you're able to open at some capacity in a safe way, the word is safe. You need your patrons to feel safe. You need good signage. You need protective equipment. The more inclusive you can be about letting a patron feel safe about your environment, the better. And that's where we all need to head. If you're closed right now and you need to stay closed, be closed. You're not going to make a bunch of money right now. So it's like figure out how you can survive. And for anybody that's out there that can work on their reopening safely and safety guidelines, I mean, we're here to help with that too. That is a big movement. And there's no way to tell. There's no way to tell when a vaccine's going to get here. Everyone's a little tired of this. There's no question about it. But you mess with that system, it's only going to knock you down further. And it's only going to take longer. So keep it together. Wear your masks. Open if you can. Even play some music if you can. And teach us how you're doing it. You know, because we need to glean into that. We need to look at Red Rocks. Like Red Rocks was open to 175 people. Nathaniel Rateliff played 6 days to 175 people. It's like, that can't be good for the artist. It's got to be exhausting. It must be very surreal as an audience member. And what can we do for protocols to test out things? Levitt Pavilion's thinking about the same thing. They're an outdoor venue like Red Rocks. It's like, how can we be communicating about how to open up better and safely and in pods, and how do bathrooms work? And it's just going to be a new world. But we're relying on those folks to start chipping away at that. And I'll just add one more thing. It's like, you think about Mission Ballroom or an indoor venue, and I know AEG worked diligently early on a safety plan and routing and how people will stand anywhere. But it's like, their point was, you know, you turn the lights off and you hand someone a beer, you play that music, it's like all bets are off, you know. Michael?
I agree with everything you're saying. I mean,
Michael, you would forget where to stand if we gave you a beer, put some music on, and turn the lights off.
I'd be wanting to stage dive. So, you know, that's the Gen Xer and me, you know, putting on the flannel, stage diving. That's where I'm at. But yeah, I agree with everything you said. You know, the fundamental flaw was we didn't address the global pandemic as a global pandemic. So now we're in this situation where, like, a band, people I know in China and Stolen are playing music festivals right now because they had way ahead of the curve. Because they've had, you know, experiences with pandemics. They know, how do we control this? How do we, you know, lock down for a certain amount of time so that in a quicker amount of time, we can go back to having festivals. Yes, it's with a lot of contact tracing. It's longer to get into the festival because you have certain protocol you have to go to, but yet here, that's where they are. And we're here worrying about, you know, my other friends that own venues that they can't open at 25% capacity because you're just throwing money down a hole.
One of the anxieties that many people in the live music industry were facing even before the pandemic was this fear that online concerts would sort of take over the live music experience. And I think from a local perspective, there's also a concern, well, what happens if you no longer sort of have geography or a place or something like that? And we've obviously been given a rapid fire education in what that reality could look like, from DIY artists doing living room shows to larger scale productions that have raked in seemingly hundreds of thousands of dollars for good causes. I'm curious, as you're looking at this, like, how do you think that's faring? Do you think people will come back to venues once all this ends, if all this ends?
I think this would be a good pivot to Michael's research regarding our sort of more immersive experiential communities. Because I know we're all sitting on this call and we're like, are you kidding? I can't wait to stage dive too, or hug someone or get near someone else's sweat. It's like, we are built to do that as humans, but especially in Colorado, that's been a growing trend, especially with millennials. Cue Michael.
Yes, I mean, that's the thing. You know, we showed that in Colorado, leading up to this, we were doing really well in terms of the infrastructure for live events. And this isn't an anomaly. Basically, you have to look at, demography is destiny. The United States, about 51% of the United States are either Generation Z or millennials. And each of those cohorts is about 80 million people. So the biggest cohort before that was the baby boomers, and that includes some of the hippies, the people that really were into live music at that point and really changed how live music was consumed. Well, now we have about 160 million people that are now, the research is showing they're really not as much into items or owning things, but they want experiences. And this whole experience economy started bubbling up. And where better to experience things than in Colorado, where you have several different festivals around the year. You have Red Rocks, you have tons of venues in Denver and other places throughout the entire state. So we were actually positioned really well for this, welcoming this new experience economy to the state. And it's shown that about 75% of the millennial generation is looking for even more ways to spend their money on experiences. And largely those are festivals, concerts, things like Meow Wolf. So Colorado's, when this dies down, I mean, eventually this pandemic will end. It's not going to end like a flip of a switch. It's going to be a while. We're going to have to learn how to first go to concerts and maybe be a little concerned about our environment and how this is working. But the thing is, we all are dying to go to concerts. And that is especially true for about 160 million people in the United States. Colorado is going to be a magnet for a lot of these people once we slowly get back into everyone feeling safe. There's a vaccine. Also, we know how, this may not be the last pandemic we see in our lifetimes. But if we learn from this one, the next iterations will be much more manageable. So I foresee Colorado, once we get over maybe a 6 to 9 month hump of being comfortable with going to concerts, I think it's going to take off because we have the infrastructure. We just have to make sure we save it through things like Save Our Stages, so we don't lose those people with knowledge of lighting and staging and promoting shows. Colorado is setting very, very well for when this is all over.
That's great news. I love that. Michael, can you talk a little bit about the ripple effect from losing the performance industry, just in terms of how it's rippled through the economy? Absolutely.
If you think about it, when you go to a concert, you rarely just literally go to a concert and go back to your home. You're often going to restaurants. You're maybe making a day out of it. In Colorado especially, again, you have people all over the world flying in to see shows at Red Rocks. Well, there you have hotel rooms. You have restaurants, eating. But what's great about Colorado too is it's a great place to hang out, even without music. So then you have people that will come in, they'll maybe drive down from North Dakota, see a show, and then go hiking or go skiing. I mean, we're also one of the very few states that will have a music festival when it's snowing outside, and people come to it because it's snowing outside. It's that kind of synergy. Our outdoor recreation economy is staggeringly strong. But when you have one part of your economy ill, it affects all the other parts of your economy. So the synergy with the food and beverage economy is very strong with music, as well as outdoor recreation. So every dollar you're spending, it ripples and can affect dollars in all the other parts of the economy.
It sounds almost viral what you're describing, which is kind of so many things that I love and think about right now in the context of the pandemic are just terrifying, right? People coming in and out of the state, people sharing space. But we'll get to a point where that's exciting again, and I'm looking forward.
Yes, we will.
And I'm curious, at the local level, from your all's perspective, what are the initiatives? I mean, you touched on what Arts and Venues is doing. What are the initiatives that are taking place that might help out? Are there local efforts afoot to stop the bleeding?
I'm going to still wear my Arts and Venues hat on that answer, because, oh, sure, there's so many people doing things. I couldn't even list it off. Whether it's fundraisers, for Colorado musicians across the state and musicians coming together and, you know, recording themselves on empty stages. We've been trying to raise money since April, you know, any way we can and patchwork that. So it's been incredible to see our music community come together around that. While this is happening, we've become much more aware than ever as a nation around social unrest. And there's little things we've been able to do at the city too. We typically, you know, city council right now is not meeting in person. And we have a program where we invite a spoken word artist or musician or some kind of performer once a month at city council meetings to lead off the meeting for 5 minutes. And we do an introduction to them and they perform. And we had to stop that back in March, and we kicked it back into high gear with our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities to really give them a stage and a platform to talk at city council, where typically it'd be hard to get in there or it's challenging and it's a little aggressive right now. That was a great way to level the playing field and be like, no, you're invited and we're going to pay you $200 to perform for 5 minutes. Please say whatever you need to say. There's Anthony Porch came on, and he has got a great piece of music called Freedom that he just released. There's a great video around it. And there's a lot of words in that that wouldn't normally be thoughtful at a city council meeting. And it's like, we're not censoring this person. We're not even going to go there. We're going to open up this forum for this. So stuff like that's happening. It's never enough. It's never enough. We also, right now, just closed our Denver Music Advancement Fund. And thank God that fund was still available. We had to cut it into a quarter of what we usually give. But we have partners from the state of Colorado with Take Note, which was the governor's initiative to give instrument and instruction to every young person K through 12 across Colorado. So they have given us $25,000 this year. Illegal Pete's gave us $25,000 again this year towards that fund. And that fund is really to show how music saves lives, how it can help with educational opportunities. It's a spectrum of ideas that just come directly from the community. It can't be for recording and touring or yourself. It just has to show off how music does all these other amazing things, and now better than ever to be showing that off. So, but yeah, people are doing stuff all over the place. Even in the protests, having people perform, march along and find their nooks to kind of share their stories and what's going on has been remarkable to see.
It's an exciting time for sure. If anyone wants to ask questions in the chat, feel free. Kindle has a really great one down here. The Denver market is hyper competitive with major players having an outsized influence on the entire music ecosystem. Is there a concern there will be an additional consolidation of control and reduced opportunities for independent venues and promoters? I read that really fast, so forgive me.
Why don't we let Kendall ask that directly? Do you mind, Kendall?
Is Kendall here?
He's muted.
Oh, hello, Kendall.
I mean, I think.
Hey, everybody. Yeah,
Okay,
I think you read it just as it sounded. You know, with the major players having such an outsized influence in the region, and everything that the independent venues are going through, are we concerned that that could have a negative impact on our ecosystem?
Yeah, that has been posed that, you know, will people like AEG, Live Nation just start buying up all these smaller indie venues and consolidating? But I've noticed that even in the chat, Chris Zacher from NIVA and Levitt Pavilion, noting that we are seeing people like Mark Geiger, the founder of Lollapalooza, building funds to purchase struggling indie venues. So, I mean, I guess in capitalism, in any external shock like this, you have players that are well-funded do seek opportunities. The question will be, the players that are well-funded, are they benevolent, or are they looking more towards consolidation, akin to something like you saw on the radio industry in the late 90s? That's a great question. I don't know the specifics of that unless Lisa may have some on the ground in Denver, but it is a thought. Consolidation always happens in times of economic stress.
Yeah, I mean, AEG has bought all those, not all of them, but has bought the latter already, right? So from Lost Lake to Larimer to the infrastructure they built, which by the way is extremely important. You know, I do appreciate that they saw that trend and support that, but you know, our DIY scene will be also resilient and do things maybe we don't need to know about right now. Hopefully they're staying safe. Also wearing masks, keep it crucial, but that's where all that stuff blooms up, you know, as youth. And people will continue to build the infrastructure back. Yes, I'm concerned about those venues. It's exactly why NIVA exists. We will Band-Aid the hell out of this to hold that. And it's not just because we're afraid of the big guys coming in and buying it all up. It's like there's plenty of other people, to Michael's point and Chris's point. Like there are people out there that want to save music and infrastructure. You know, once our musicians feel confident enough to come back and play or tour, knock on something, like that's a whole nother level, let alone patrons, you know. So it's a trifecta of reopening safely, and we have to go back to that. And how much money will it cost us to keep a venue until that starts to happen is the big question mark and moving target that we're all facing right now. Yeah.
There was the troubling NIVA study that if federal aid didn't come by the end of, it was a couple months ago now, I believe, that 90% of independent venues were weighing whether or not to close. Meredith has a question here. Is there concern that if we don't get some economic relief soon, we'll start losing music and creative talent? They'll start seeking opportunities elsewhere and it won't come back. It's an interesting question when the whole whole world is struggling.
I need to look at this question closer. So Meredith, do you want to pop in again? Sorry to do this. It's easier to hear your voices.
Yeah, no worries. And it's thinking more about people as unemployment in the music industry continues. At some point, you know, savings start to run out and you need to find jobs and work elsewhere. Is that a concern about that employment numbers coming back?
Yeah, that's a huge concern. Basically, you know, the economic growth and such is a competition for talent. The regions with the best talent, the brightest, the well-educated, or not even educated, just highly skilled, depending on how you get to that those talents. That's what drives your economy. In this case, the music economy. The places to figure out how to reopen the most efficiently and the most professionally, and that can go through that process, will retain that talent. I think what you'll see is if places botch that reopening, there's going to be a point where people in the music industry that have been out of work will start to look at, say, Boise, Idaho, and let's say Boise, Idaho has done things well. You know, you could lose that really expert lighting rigger, or you could lose that promoter to Boise because they are opening, they have jobs. You know, that's a situation we have to be careful with. In general, it's, you know, that's why NIVA and Save Our Stages is so important, because we have to preserve that infrastructure. The longer we go on without live music, the more precarious that infrastructure is. And by infrastructure, I mean, yes, the venues, physical spaces, but also the knowledge infrastructure of these people that, the people that have been working at Red Rocks for 10 years, they know so much about that and that specific venue that if they're gone, it's going to be hard to replace that. And then you have to start worrying about the quality of the product we're offering in Colorado. So that's why it's so important to just try to, in some ways, financially support all of the infrastructure while we're waiting, because on the other side of this, again, it's going to be fantastic, but we are in danger of losing people if we don't support and then have a great plan for reopening.
I just want to add to that, because the word reputation comes to mind right now in the music business, and whether you're the musician or the manager or the booking agent at a venue, reputation is everything. It's how you come to the table on any one of those, any firing off on any one of those cylinders. That's what makes your music ecosystem work and happen. And I think NIVA is interesting too right now, just to use that as the example. When you can get 300 venues on a call every week at a town hall meeting, I'm like, whoa, because otherwise you're like, I feel irrelevant as a booking agent. How's my reputation? What do I say to my people? But now they can kind of all talk to each other. And I wonder how that will also paradigmly shift how we all book music, and how we represent our artists, and more artists of color for that matter. I mean, we had a lot of discussion around that. Like, what kind of genres do you do? Should we open up our doors more to other kinds of people and music? And how do we do that better? I just wanted to kind of float that inspirational piece that's going on the back end, and the wheels are turning and things are working really well. But another reason to be saving and supporting these people right now.
Yeah, I'd like to, that's so great. And that's one other thing I think that, I mean, nothing good's coming out of a pandemic, but the fact that community, now that we've seen what happens to an industry when the revenue's totally gone, community's still there, and community is, I would argue, thickening and concentrating. And I think there will be a lot of great community aspects that come out of this. I mean, just looking at NIVA and the fact that you're basically herding cats at this point, but they've done it in 2 months. And now that herd of cats is incredibly strong. And I think that network is going to have a lot of great things come out of it on the other side.
There's a great conversation raging about Mark Geiger in the comments. I'm not quite sure how to handle that, so I'm going to continue, but I'm going through the comments here. And if you're interested in that, I think there's a lot of really good discussion over there. One conversation or question from Cree is, what are people's thoughts on these socially distanced shows, the drive-ins, indoor events, outdoor events? Are they actually safe? Is it responsible to be having them at all right now? There's a lot of debate going on around that, and a lot of concern, I think, for musicians, particularly in terms of playing it, and fans as well.
It's just like venues. Every venue is different. There is no blueprint. There's just no blueprint. And it's too difficult to say like, oh, it's not working. It's gonna work for some people. Dazzle did a great job. They went to Westminster and figured out a drive-in concert and how to faction that when Denver probably wouldn't have allowed it. And they're testing the boundaries. They're courageous in what they're trying to do. And nothing's going to be perfect because, again, it's the patrons. It's certainly your signage and how you handle things in your protocol, and you hand somebody a pamphlet and say, here's how you're going to do this. You can only do what you can do, but you got to test stuff out. And then as the consumer, if you're concerned about it, don't go. And if you're uncomfortable and you try it, you can leave. Like, we all have to kind of be responsible for ourselves and each other best way we can. Otherwise, it ain't going to work very well. And if you see something, say something. Like, if there are protocols and you're at a festival or socially distanced situation, talk to the person that puts it on and be like, hey, I have an idea for you. This didn't work. They can't think of everything. And even if they try, I think we all need to come together better around communication when it comes to that kind of thing.
Another thing that I think is really interesting is, we've had this technology. I mean, we're all on Zoom right now. Zoom's been around. I use it now all the time, and I'm certainly going to be using it going forward because there's a lot of things. Cree is actually a student of mine from a class that's online. But what I love is for musicians, in some ways, I think we're starting to see new revenue streams. Will this kind of thing supplant live music? Absolutely not. But will it augment it? I think so. I've been watching Fridays I'm in Low, which is the band Low from Duluth, Minnesota, putting on these concerts every Friday, and they're wonderful. And that's something that going forward, I'd pay for. And I think there's a lot of bands that are realizing that, no, it's not going to supplant their income, but this is maybe a way to augment it. Maybe a way to do a special release show, or people can pay an extra tier to have maybe 2 or 3 songs after the concert from their own home. Things like that. I think it's a wonderful addition. Again, once we get on that other side.
Yeah, I want to compliment that with, it's a personal taste too. It's like, what do we like about music? What would we go see if, fill in blank of name of artist that's like, I'm going to do a private little house show and only 10 people can see it online. Consistency has been another word. I'm just going to pull words and say them. Consistency. So, to your point with Low doing that every Friday, when I've come across things that are consistent during the week, I love that too. That's my MO though. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can rely on it. It's 5 o'clock on Thursday. I'm going to sign up for this. And whether it's work related or pivot to something related to music or programs that I want to be a part of, or engagement in ways, again, like we never normally do, that's pretty damn exciting. And you get to meet new people, and we're talking to people, across the nation in ways we never have before.
I love that. It's so fun to bump into a concert and just sort of stumble your way in when you weren't intending to go to. I love that on social. Meredith has a question. How will the pandemic change the touring industry long term?
Michael, let's both tackle this best we can. And actually, I don't know if Chris Zacher is still on this call, but I would almost tap him into this too, because we've talked to Levitt a lot about what reopening might feel like and how do we test that out, and do we put people in 2 pods at Levitt. And one of the major things that comes up is like back of house, and that's, again, just to get started. It's like your tour bus is a mobilized moving cruise ship basically, and how do you handle like what those people have been? Where have they been? Are they getting tested? Can we get tested quick enough? What does that look like? The back of house, try to navigate. You're not going to have people meet and greeting the artists, or merch tables might look different, or how your back of house works with the incoming tour. But Chris, you've got insights on this, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. It's tough to figure out right now because every state is opening up at different times and at different levels. And once your tour routing's blown up, the tour doesn't make sense for the artists anymore. So, most artists need, a run of at least 10 shows in order to make it work. And if you can't safely and effectively get from California to Denver to the Midwest and back, that tour is just not going to happen. And that's the most concerning part right now. Also, you're talking about, I think, Lisa, you touched on it, putting all of these artists in a bus, going from city to city, staying in hotels from time to time, interacting with staff that has different protocols. You can go to Florida right now and essentially have an entire show going on in normal capacity. But in Denver, you're limited to 25 people indoor. So the health concerns from the artist standpoint far outweigh their desire to get on the road and start touring yet. So I don't think we're going to start opening up until there's a vaccine available on the touring side.
Yeah, Chris, to that point, like every state is done under a different mandate. Our leadership and our communication at the top is incredibly confusing. But yeah, trying to get an artist to go from the South up to the North, it's like so many things are going on there. It's political.
When you think about how many people are involved from the time that artist arrives backstage to set up and tear down, depending on the show, you could have anywhere from 5 people to 100 people involved in that process. And, are those people quarantining? Probably not. And so it becomes a health issue for the artists too. Is it worth getting back on the road and risking their lives right now when there's not a vaccine? And the answer that I get from all of the managers that we deal with is no, it's not something we want to risk right now. Long term, how will it change? I don't know. I mean, there was a pandemic in 1918, and within 5 years, everything seemed to be back to normal. So let's give it a 5-year time span. It's going to take time. We move a lot, and somebody, I think the mayor was talking yesterday about how people come in and out of this city all the time, and you have to think about that as well. It's not just about the people who live here; it's about all of this transmission of airplanes and everything else. So difficult.
Are there surprising lessons that you all have learned that might shape or change how events run long after the pandemic from this?
I'm going to let someone else take that one.
I think I'm the only one of the three of us that has a venue. So, and I'm not really on this panel, so I don't mean to take this over from you guys.
Go for it. Go for it.
I mean, yeah, I mean, the pandemic is shifting on how we're setting up for when we reopen. And I think that'll last for a long time. You know, I would expect that by next summer, if we can get to 30 or 40% capacity in outdoor settings, that we'll start to see those protocols become more norm. What we have to do from city to city and probably nationwide is have strategies in place where every venue is following a subset of rules on how we bring people into our venue and how we seat them and get them back out of the venue. And there's some technology coming down the pipelines that people are probably going to have to download an app on their phone where a promoter can contact them and tell them that you have to get tested. And then that app ties back to the testing networks. And when you show up at the venue with your QR code, they scan your ticket off of the app, and if it has a red X on it, and this actually exists, so if it has a red X on it, you're not allowed in the venue. It means that you didn't get tested within the time frame that the promoter said you had to, or you didn't get a vaccine once it's available. I mean, I'm hearing that the vaccine period is going to be up to 18 months from when it's out. So this isn't going to change. We're not going back to pre-COVID probably until 2022, 2023 at best.
I can speak to how things have changed within my world. It was fascinating there's so little data. There's so few cities that know how big their music ecosystems are. And once this hit and all of a sudden it's not there anymore, or it's at a standstill, people are scrambling to figure out, I can't tell you how many times I got a question, how many venues are in city X, you know? And I'm like, well, that's something that we should have figured out long before. So now I'm excited to hopefully be working with NIVA to kind of look at that, like just inventorying of what is in within your region, within your city concerning venues is important. And then to go further, you know, how big is your music scene? How big is the ecosystem? Most regions, they can tell you in aerospace, how many firms are working in aerospace, how many people are working in aerospace. If you ask them about their music ecosystem, most of the time, no, they have no idea. So this, I think, has been a wake-up call for a lot of regional leaders that we need to keep our eyes on this and know, because it generates millions of dollars for our region.
And the biggest question we've had at NIVA on this, Michael, is what constitutes a music venue? If you're putting on, you know, an acoustic act one day a week, are you a music venue? You know, in the grand scheme of things, probably not. But if you're talking about tax revenue and entertainment, yeah, you probably are. And that's the hardest thing for us to figure out at NIVA, is to define what a music venue is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes all the way down from the federal level. The way data is collected, you kind of have to look at drinking establishments to figure out music venues. And I really argue that there should be a secretary position in the cabinet of the president that deals with arts and culture and goes downwards to really strengthen data capturing, so that even at the federal level, we know what our arts and cultural infrastructure is. And I think that would be a great first step.
Sign me up for that job.
It's yours. You're hired.
Thanks.
And in Denver, where we've had such a strong live music industry, but maybe have plenty of room to grow in some of the other sectors. I'm curious, or parts of the music industry. I'm curious if you've seen any evolution in other parts of the music economy beyond live during the pandemic, particularly.
I'm not, you know, education comes to mind, you know, and I'm thinking about our youth, and I'm thinking about how people are doing instruction of music online and vocal lessons and all kinds of things that are happening that it's just not the same, right? So it's hard. I don't know, Michael, do you have thoughts on this one too?
I have to say, at Colorado State University, we spent the summer thinking about how can we provide, because we have the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, and we have just enormous amounts of lessons, recitals, performances. And it was interesting that, again, addressing in technology, well, how can we do this? And I have to say, we figured it out. You know, our lessons are going on, our recitals are going on. So that's been really exciting. And I think that's a skill too, that the students, having been through that process, because we're talking about highly skilled musicians, an undergraduate at graduate level, they're going to come out of this program knowing that, you know what, I can teach in person, but I can also teach online with a great efficiency and reach even more students. And I think that's fantastic.
I keep hitting the wrong unmute button. Meredith, it looks like we're kind of coming to an end now, and I'm going to let Meredith pop in and wrap things up. But Michael, Lisa, Chris, everybody here, thank you for participating. Thanks for great questions, and I'll hand it over to Meredith.
Thank you. Well, I will echo those thanks to Michael, to Lisa, to Kyle for your great moderation, to our partners at Levitt Pavilion Denver and NIVA. Thanks, Chris, for chiming in there at the end. Always nice to have a cameo from our co-organizers. We will be continuing to be putting these webinars together, focused on the creative industries and the music industry. So if there's something you'd like for us to offer, a voice you want to hear from, a topic you want us to cover, please reach out to us. We are doing these for you. We want to make sure they are relevant and helpful to you. We'll be getting the video posted, and just stay in touch, keep at it. We will get through this. We will get through the election. We will get through this pandemic. We will come out better and stronger because we have the arts. So keep that in your heart and mind, and have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.